Did you know that Regieleki is so fast it can outspeed Trick Room? This is true. Regieleki can achieve such a high speed stat under certain conditions that it breaks the math behind Trick Room. If you're not aware, Trick Room is a field condition in Pokemon that is supposed to reverse the turn order, making the slower Pokemon move first instead of the faster Pokemon. So how is Regieleki able to achieve such a high speed stat that it ignores this mechanic completely and moves first anyway? And what other weird math is there in Pokemon that results in similarly odd situations? Let's take a look. The way that Trick Room is actually implemented in Pokemon is a little strange. The intuitive way you'd think it works is that when Trick Room is clicked and Trick Room is active on the field, it modifies turn logic. Wherever in the code they decide that the faster Pokemon is the one that moves first, they just flip that temporarily. But that's not actually how it's implemented. I guess because they didn't want to modify the fundamental turn logic. Maybe they were afraid that could mess something up. So the way that Trick Room is implemented is the speed stat of each Pokemon is modified temporarily, with a formula that makes it so the slower Pokemon moves first, by actually making their speed stat higher while Trick Room is active. While Trick Room is active, every Pokemon's speed is set to 10,000 minus their speed stat. So Regieleki, for example, with negative speed IVs and everything, has 86 speed. So its speed is set to 10,000 minus 86, which is 9,914. When a Pokemon's speed stat gets this high, it triggers something in the code. Something kind of interesting. For whatever reason in Pokemon, if a Pokemon's speed is equal to or greater than 8,192, they will subtract 8,192 from the speed stat. I don't know why exactly, there's probably some sort of way to avoid an overflow glitch by subtracting from the value in the code instead of having it actually wrap around because of a overflow. I don't know, but that's how it's coded. So when you do this with Trick Room, that 9,914 speed stat Regieleki has gets subtracted by 8,192, meaning that Regieleki's final speed stat is 1,722. If that sounds overly complicated for no real reason, it kind of is, but I'm sure they had some reason to do it like this. So, if a Pokemon like a Scarf Latios, for example, is also on the field and Trick Room is up, Scarf Latios' speed is 525. So Latios' speed gets set to 10,000 minus 525 minus 8,192, which results in 1,283 speed, which is lower than the Regieleki speed. Therefore, Regieleki is going first in Trick Room now. I suppose this achieved the intended result, and this is how Trick Room has worked since Gen 4. So they've just kept it this way. Even though it's a kind of a weird way to implement this effect that I'm sure none of you imagined it actually worked like this, but hey, if it works, it works. But there is a problem with this implementation of Trick Room, a problem that is very specific and rarely ever comes up realistically, but is a problem nonetheless. If a Pokemon happens to have a speed stat of 1,809 or more while Trick Room is active, something interesting happens. 10,000 minus 1,809 is exactly equal to 8,191. Forgive all these numbers, but you'll notice this is just one value lower than the threshold to have your speed subtracted by 8,192. Remember, it's hard-coded into the game that if you are equal to or greater than 8,192, you subtract that same amount. Because you just exactly missed that threshold of getting a huge amount of speed subtracted with this implementation of Trick Room, your final speed stat after all this is said and done ends up way higher than everything else. And one of the Pokemon that can achieve such a high speed stat is Regieleki, the fastest Pokemon in the game. Regieleki starts with a speed stat of 548 if it has max EVs and a plus speed nature. Now that's not high enough yet, we've got to reach at least 1,809 speed, but check it out. Regieleki has the move Agility, which boosts speed by 2 stages. So if Regieleki happens to boost its speed, which is an absurd thing to do, you're Regieleki, of course, you're already the fastest thing ever, but if Regieleki decides it wants to be even faster and boost its speed up to the maximum, +6, It achieves a speed stat of 2,192, which is over that value that we need. Under Trick Room, this Regieleki has its speed stat set to 10,000 minus 2,192, which equals 7,808. This is well under the threshold for that big subtraction, and I'm sorry, Reuniculus, but Regieleki is outrunning you by thousands and thousands of points of speed. Your Trick Room is ruined. Some other Pokemon that can achieve such a high speed stat that they outspeed Trick Room itself include Floatzel and Excadrill, who have speed doubling abilities in the weather. As for why Trick Room is implemented this way in the first place, I'm not entirely sure. I think it might have something to do with them avoiding negative numbers. Perhaps negative numbers would break things. And like I said earlier, maybe they didn't want to directly modify the game's turn logic in fear that that also might break something. This method just set the Pokemon's speed values to temporarily be altered in the Trick Room, which may have been a more efficient way to do it. It was a bizarre roundabout way to do it, but it can be broken with this very specific method. The next weird Pokemon math scenario is in Gen 1, and I know what you're thinking. Gen 1 has a million glitches. What else is new? A glitch in Gen 1? It's more surprising to hear that something functions as intended in Gen 1, Jim. Come on now, but this is a very cool glitch, because this one has some niche competitive application. In the Gen 1 games, there is a specific HP value you can have that prevents recovery moves from occurring. If the difference between a Pokemon's current HP and their maximum HP is either 255 or 511, all healing moves will simply not work. So for example, Chansey. Chansey has a max HP of 703. So if Chansey's current HP in a battle is equal to 703 minus 255, which is 448, it won't be able to use healing moves. It also won't be able to use healing moves if its HP is exactly 192 in a battle. Its current HP. So why is this happening? Why do these specific values of HP prevent you from being able to heal? Well, every time a healing move is clicked, the game checks whether you're at full HP. If you're at full HP, a healing move will fail because, of course, you can't be healed any further. You're at the maximum. This is not exactly how the check was implemented in the code, though. The HP values of Pokemon in these Generation 1 games were stored as 16-bit values. If you don't know what a bit is just a binary digit in programming. It can be either a 0 or a 1. You may have heard the term byte before. 1 byte can store 8 bits in it. 8 values that are either 0 or 1. So a 16-bit value has 16 binary digits in it. So a Pokemon's HP value is represented by 16 binary digits somewhere on the cartridge that translate to the larger value that is their actual HP in the game. I don't exactly know how that works, but it works somehow, with computing magic of some sort. The 16 bits represent larger values, and for a 16-bit value there is a lower byte and an upper byte. The upper byte is the collection of the first 8 binary digits on the left, and the lower byte are the following 8 binary digits on the right. Does that make sense, folks? It kind of makes sense, I hope. So the way that they did the HP check in the Generation 1 games is not by directly comparing all 16 of the bits. They only compared the lower bytes to save memory or something, because it was the Game Boy. They didn't have much memory or computing power. So they're not comparing all 16 of the bits in the HP value, just the lower byte with the other lower byte, to check if current HP is equal to max HP. And for the most part, this works fine. It saves a bit of memory, and it correctly checks whether a healing move should work or not. But specifically when the current HP is equal to the maximum HP minus 255, for whatever reason the lower byte of both of these values are exactly the same, even though they are different 16-bit values. Their lower bytes are the same, but the upper byte is a bit different because, of course, the number is not the same. But the game thinks that they're the same number. So if Chansey has 448 HP and clicks soft boiled, the game checks to see if it's at max HP, and because of the way that it does that check, it thinks that Chansey is at max HP when it's not. because 448 has the same lower bite as 703, which is Chansey's max HP. There is more minutiae I could go into here. I don't fully understand exactly how binary translates into real numbers, to be honest, but that's why this recovery move check fails sometimes. Luckily, it's very rare that this will ever come up, because to be on a precise value of HP is difficult to achieve. It's very rare to be able to deal a precise amount of damage in Pokemon, because there are damage rolls. When you click a move, it has a range of different amounts of damage it can deal. But there are some moves that deal a precise amount of damage, like Dragon Rage, which deals exactly 40 damage to a Pokemon. And more notable are Seismic Toss and Nightshade, which deal an amount of damage equal to a Pokemon's level. In competitive, Pokemon are always going to be level 100, obviously, to get the most amount of stats they can, so Seismic Toss and Nightshade usually do 100 flat damage. But to trigger this recovery glitch, to deny the enemy from being able to heal ever again by bringing them to that specific value, you need to do 255 damage specifically, from max HP. So Seismic Toss at level 100 won't work. You can bring them down to 200 minus their max HP, but as soon as you click the third Seismic Toss, you've missed your chance. They're down to their max HP minus 300. So for this reason, to trigger this glitch, you actually have to make your Pokemon level 85. Exactly level 85. Because 85 times 3 is 255. So if you manage to click Seismic Toss 3 times against a Pokemon with a healing move, you will bring them to their max HP minus 255, triggering this glitch every single time they try to heal and preventing them from healing ever again, which can be very useful. The next one is a Gen 2 Pokemon math moment, where Marowak is so powerful that it ends up breaking damage calculation, and Marowak ends up dealing no damage at all. Marowak is an OU ranked Pokemon in Gen 2 if you weren't aware. It's one of the strongest attackers in the entire game, largely because of its exclusive item, the Thick Club. If held by Cubone or Marowak specifically, it grants double attack, which is enormous. Marowak can achieve a sky-high attack stat, and with Swords Dance to boost itself even further, it can break entire teams and sweep games. But there's a problem. You see, in Gen 2, during a turn when damage is calculated, if a Pokemon's stat exceeds the value of 1024, that stat is decreased by 1024. This is probably also to prevent some sort of overflow scenario, much like the speed decrease that takes place that we talked about earlier in the Trick Room section. For the most part, this doesn't come up because stats are usually capped at 999. For example, if a Pokemon uses Belly Drum, maxing out their attack stat, it can't exceed 999. It's coded that way, so as not to trigger this subtraction. But there are some things that bypass this 999 cap. And one of those is the Thick Club. With maximum DVs in attack, a level 100 Marowak can achieve 258 attack. With a Thick Club equipped, that attack is doubled to be 516. And if Marowak uses Swords Dance, its attack is doubled again to a value of 1032. So if this Marowak with 1032 attack chooses to use an attacking move, as it probably wants to, it's going to be met with disaster, as during damage calculation, it's going to detect that its stat is over the value of 1024. It's going to subtract Marowak's attack by 1024, leaving Marowak with a measly 8 in attack, dealing pathetic damage to the enemy. Unfortunately, the stat cap of 999 does not take effect here, and Marowak's attack goes over the threshold, leaving it completely useless in this instance. For this reason, in Gen 2, Marowak should not be running maximum attack DVs. You want to run just enough so that your attack is 254, and after Thick Club and Swords Dance you will not exceed this threshold, leaving yourself completely useless. If you Swords Dance again, with this particular Marowak, you will also not trigger the stat rollover, because the source of attack increase is from a boosting move, not from Thick Club. It would be useless to do so, of course, because your attack is capped at 999 from boosts. But at least you won't roll back over to 0 attack and deal negative damage. Pikachu is a Pokemon that can also trigger this stat rollover with its item Light Ball. Light Ball is exclusive to Pikachu and it grants double special attack. And much like the Thick Club, this boost from Light Ball does not trigger the stat cap either. It's a bit harder to pull off with Pikachu though, and it requires you to baton pass Pikachu some stats from a teammate. I don't know why you'd want to do this either, it's directly disadvantageous for you, but if you're interested in the pure science of it, you can trigger a stat rollover with Pikachu and have almost no special attack if you would like to. In that scenario, having your attack stat rollover and become 0 is very bad, but there is an instance where having a stat of 0 is incredibly advantageous. And that is with defensive stats. At some point in Pokemon's damage formula, when you are using an attack, it will take your attacking stat and divide it by their respective defensive stat. This determines how much damage the move should do. If it's a physical move, it factors in your physical attack stat and their physical defense stat. If it's a special move, it takes your special attack and their special defense. But what if the defending stat value is 0? The damage formula in this case will attempt to divide by 0, which causes some sort of problem. By attempting to divide by 0, you will deal almost no damage to the enemy Pokemon. Actually, it'll break the whole damage formula and ruin everything. So if you can achieve a 0 defense stat or special defense stat, it is incredibly powerful. Basically makes you invulnerable. But there isn't really any realistic way to achieve a defense stat of 0. No Pokemon has a defense stat of 0. You cannot reduce your defense stat to 0 by any normal means. But there is one way. And this was actually discovered in Generation 8, fairly recently. If a Pokemon has a stat of 655, before modifiers like items that modify stats or boosts or anything, just the raw stat, it will cause a rollover. It'll subtract 655 from the stat, bringing it back to 0. If you have a stat of 656, for example, it'll subtract 655 from it, and that stat will be exactly 1. So theoretically, if Pokemon has exactly 655 defense or special defense, that is the way to achieve 0 in the stat, because it subtracts that exact same amount and brings you down to 0. And only one Pokemon is capable of doing this. Only one Pokemon has a high enough base defense or special defense. And that is Eternamax Eternatus. This Pokemon is not obtainable in a normal playthrough. You can't get it by any genuine means. It's intended to be a boss with absurdly high stats on purpose. The only context where Pokemon like this are used, these unique forms that usually are unobtainable, is a format called the Hackmons. Hackmons is a competitive Pokemon format where hacked Pokemon are allowed, and through hacks you can obtain these secret Pokemon. Eternamax Eternatus has an absurd 250 base defense and special defense, and if you put exactly 240 EVs in either of these stats and a plus nature, the value is 655, and that wraps back around to 0, making Eternamax Eternatus effectively invincible on at least one side of the attacking spectrum of your choosing. This discovery made Gen 8 pure Hackmons an unplayable metagame. Eternamax Eternatus was so powerful with this stat rollover trigger that the only way to kill the thing was with one-hit KO moves like Fissure. This is a rare scenario where something was so game-breaking and over-centralizing that they abandoned the format. Gen 8 pure Hackmons doesn't really exist anymore because of this. And it's a little bit funny that if you just have one extra point of defense or special defense in this instance, you will have a 1 defense or special defense stat and become a terrible Pokemon that can be KO'd by even a simple gust from Pidgey or something like that. But by having precisely 0, you can evade death itself, breaking the damage formula. And it feels kind of fitting that Eternamax Eternatus, some eldritch being beyond human comprehension, is the one that can achieve this game-breaking scenario. I'll be honest, folks, it took me quite a bit of time to wrap my mind around all of this mathematics. So I hope you enjoyed the video, but there are some insane examples of the in-game mathematics of Pokemon, like damage formulas and the turn order systems, being completely broken by very specific instances that often actually have some competitive applications. Some of them are just funny jokes, like the Regieleki outspeeding Trick Room. But the Marowak one, you gotta lower your attack on Marowak or it will wrap around and be too much attack, and you'll result in doing no damage. That's a real thing. The level 85 seismic toss thing could genuinely be used in a competitive setting that has a real value to it, and the Eternamax scenario broke an entire format that people used to play. Once that was discovered, it exploded the whole thing. Which of these mathematic moments is your favorite, folks? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.